Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, there's no greater tragedy in the world than a life half lived, with Sam Conniff Allende. We talk about you can't really help anyone, but you can provide a platform for people to help themselves. Finding your passion is a problematic question, and when someone asks you what your exit strategy is, show them the fire escape.
Sam Conniff Allende is a multi-award-winning serial social entrepreneur and co-founder and former CEO of Livity, Don't Panic and Live magazine. His new book, Be More Pirate, or How to Take on the World and Win, is a manifesto for each of us to create the sort of good trouble the world needs. It's based on the true and untold strategy and success of the golden age of pirates as agents of change, leadership and social innovation, as unlikely as that sounds. Sam has been a mentor to thousands of young entrepreneurs and is now a sought-after public speaker on innovation, entrepreneurship, marketing, leadership and youth.
What do you think is a good starting point? Is there any way you'd like to begin?
I like with the setup that you just said, the theme of the podcast. How do they find their
passion?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question. I've always struggled with it as well. I mean, because I think that it's really hard to know. I think passion is a difficult word because, what if you haven't got one or you don't feel like you've got one? Do you have to be good at something to have a passion? Do you have to be clear on what it is? Do I have to have a singular? What if I'm a bit disinterested? Or what if I'm not that confident about I find all of that stuff problematic because I love those people that you meet and ever since they were a child they wanted to be an astronaut and they've spent their whole life knowing they wanted to be an astronaut and they end up being an astronaut. But I feel so far away from that single-mindedness. I worry that I'm dishonest. It's like also when people, really put their hands on their shoulder and just tell you to be yourself. You say, I like that advice, but sometimes I don't know how to be myself because who the fuck am I?
Who am I? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. what does being me mean? And how much of life is a bit of a construct? And I've read lots of self-help and watched thousands of TED Talks, and that whole idea that you can create who you want to be. I don't know. The older I get, and perhaps wiser, or perhaps the truth of that is the less I give a shit. I conclude that this is actually just a slow process of revealing who you are. You don't get to choose who you are. that was designed into you before an age that you really remember, and then the rest of it's a steady journey of kind of slow reveal.
Oops.
All right, that's how I am. And the day you stop struggling against that and trying to be this person that you're not, and then come to terms with what you might be like, and then go in that direction, but to try and be the most beautiful version of that you can. That felt like a bit of a turning point. One of the few moments I've actually begun to feel like a grown-up. So I couldn't tell you.
Grown-up, hate that word.
Yeah, no, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
I assumed when I was a non-grown-up that it would be when I started a business, or then when I sold a business, or then when I got married, or then when I had a child, or then when you had suffered. None of those events ever made me feel like a grown-up. But then every now and then you meet a real grown-up, and they've been a grown-up since they were forever. Yeah, exactly. There's just grown-up sensibility. Yes. I don't know many of those people.
No.
But I got asked it a lot, certainly through the process of Livity, which I started in my early 20s. And I'd been a chef, I'd run club nights, I'd done lots of things that you could say were my passion. Like I loved cooking and I liked making things and I loved putting on raves and dancing until 6 a.m. But there was never a plan, so I wasn't really following my passion in a clear sense. I was just doing whatever felt fun. And then Livity kind of was the first thing I'd ever done by design. Like to sit down and write a plan and say that feels like a good idea, and interviewed people, and then one of those people became my business partner, and we were like, we're going to do this, and we raised a little bit of money. We've managed to scrabble together about 10 grand, and we thought that would pay us for 3 months, and if we couldn't find a client within 3 months, then there wasn't any validity to the idea. And we had a really clear idea that was going to change the world. We were going to start an ethical marketing agency that would get the world's coolest brands to work with us because they'd see us as a great marketing agency, but we would get them to become the world's most responsible brands. And rather than just sell the shit no one needs, we'd get them to adapt themselves around doing stuff that people really do need. And that's this space that we're in. Great big warehouse in the middle of Brixton, and there's exactly the same space in Johannesburg and now also in Nairobi and in Lagos. And so the model we've also proven works, and we'll see thousands of young people come through here in a year, and many of them from quite challenging or tough backgrounds, or they've been excluded from school, or they've found themselves on the edges of society, and their experience in a normal functioning creative workplace makes them suddenly realize who they can be. And for the clients who come here to generate insight and understanding into young people's lives, they then have also transformational experience. And then the output is a really award-winning and effective work, because it's not some Oxbridge twats, putting an insights report into a deck of slides. It's real life and real insight. And so it's a win-win. Transformational experience for young people, eye-opening experience for adults, reconnecting with the real world, and outcome, good, useful, positive work. But right through the first 10 years of it, when people say, God, this is amazing, we've won all these awards with Social Enterprise of the Year, Agency of the Year, I was made a Social Enterprise Ambassador. So, I can tell that whole story of Livity, but to get to the point of this conversation, people would routinely ask, why do you do this? This is amazing. You must really found your passion. And for at least a decade, I didn't have an honest answer to that. I would literally have to make up answers that felt as worthy as the business had become, or that kind of justified, but I was honestly making up, because I didn't have a real, it wasn't some driving reason to do it all. It just seemed like a good idea, and then luckily, because of good timing and some hard work, it had taken off. So that's the long way around of saying, I think it's a problematic question. Do you know what your passion is?
Yes.
What is it?
I hate waste. So it's rallying against people wasting talent, their lives. We interviewed somebody the weekend who has stage 4 terminal ovarian cancer, and just the positive message that we're all terminal, and it's like, yes, that is it. So it's kind of waking people up and get them to live and not zombie sleepwalk through their lives. I saw a guy yesterday with 2 mobile phones and walking along looking at them both. It's like, Jesus Christ, look, there's stuff around you. You're going to get hit by traffic, dude.
Did you run up and slap him?
No. James wouldn't let me.
Back Michelle.
We're all terminal. Fuck, I've never thought about it like that.
So don't wait till retirement to do the fun stuff. Do
Live
it now.
Live fully every day.
Marcus Aurelius, I read the other day, the Stoic, used to have a boy walk around behind him, reminding him that he was going to die. Such was his dedication to recognition that you have to live every moment. I mean, that seems extreme.
I know. It's like, Oliver, keep telling me I wouldn't know it. That'll traumatise my 9-year-old, I suppose.
Yeah. What's your passion?
I think in many ways this is why this podcast has come together. Yeah. And whenever I've worked within a corporation, it's almost been bringing people together, changing, what we talk about, changing the rules or questioning. I think my parents were from a quite traditional background, both in education. My father was a head teacher, my mother a primary school teacher, but I was always brought up to say that rules were created for a reason, but that doesn't mean you can't question them. And I struggled in corporate to actually follow some of the processes, the protocols, the bureaucracy, the politics. So I was in many ways seen as a troublemaker, a rebel, or a word I came across in the most recent years was an entrepreneur, trying to be an entrepreneur within a more corporate structure. Yeah. So I've always wanted to get people to, I suppose, see their potential, open their eyes to what's possible, and that you should really follow something that you enjoy doing. Don't just do this for the next 40 years because that's what the premise is in society, that you leave school or university and get a job, get a house, a partner, a dog, a cat, have children, and then you've succeeded in life.
And then wait around bored and hating your job until you
retire, when you do something that you actually enjoy. So I think it's only been recently that it's how do you take that and create some form of movement where you say, well, the podcast is a great way to do that. inspire people, show them stories of people who have gone through the same challenges, got over the same obstacles, adversity. They've done it. Why can't you do it?
Yeah.
So it's a starting point almost in inspire someone to reflect on their current position and mull over and take action, I suppose, isn't it? It's I get a lot of energy from that, to see somebody really grow, develop, achieve their potential. I guess it's feeling more fulfilled.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
reminds me of the book, it's Viktor Frankl, isn't it? The Search for Meaning.
Yes.
And it's, we all have that sense of wanting some fulfillment, or what is my purpose in life?
Yep.
And it goes beyond, I do a 9 to 5, I've done what society expects of me.
Yeah.
It's leaving some form of legacy, or that's what I've given to the world. I've helped to disrupt something or create something of value, provide employment, help others to get over, people like you do, Michelle, coaching leaders to help them fulfill their potential to make an organization grow and thrive collectively. So that, I think, is something I've always found passionate to me. And this is a starting point of a way to do that. It's a very long-winded answer, but it's not something I've actually got as a 60-second pitch.
But I mean, Michelle, you're one of the first people that I can think of that answers that question so clearly. And it doesn't surprise me that you have a really clear answer to that. But like you, I find it much more difficult. I can kind of post-rationalize the things that, like, I'm really with you. People taking action then provides me with fulfillment, and you want to create change and definitely try and defy the sometimes inevitability of life, drawing you down stages. But, it's one of the other lines you said about putting some science behind the cynic. We love Simon Sinek, and I'm sure that it's a bit like at some point in the world, there's always an episode of Friends on someone's TV somewhere. I'm sure that somewhere in the world, there's always someone drawing concentric circles and and drawing a Y in the middle of it. But there is a problem with that, purpose and passion, and they're such weighted words. And I think it's probably the minority of us that can articulate it really clearly and know it with the certainty that you do. Because it's just more complex than that, isn't it? It changes over time, and it's different on different days. And there's almost whilst we're trying to, in a way, push back and avoid inevitability, that is that then who I am, and that's going to define me, and that's my life. And whilst it's a useful navigational force, does it become a bind on all of those things? I think it's tricky. And as Frankl suggests, it may well be deeper than you know or are aware of.
Yeah, it's just the thing that gets on my goat the most. I suppose it's useful. It just winds me up, like just wasted time, effort, energy on pointless processes. Rules generally, to be fair.
What do you do to relax?
To relax, swimming, because you can't do anything else.
That's not wasting time.
No, that's not wasting time. That's different, though, isn't it?
Is there a benefit to wasting time?
Headspace, thinking time.
Yeah.
Because you have to be, there's a balance of being always on.
Are you any good at stopping?
No, really crap at stopping.
Interesting.
Because we're all terminal.
What does that? You're the psychologist. What does that say about you?
I don't know. Have to move, keep moving, keep going.
Like a shark.
Just keep swimming. More like Dory. More like the turtles, dude. James can do really good accents. Do the turtle.
Oh, is that the surfer dude?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
We sometimes use these to talk to each other, just like dude. Where are we going, dude? I'm hungry, man.
Just sitting on the microphones, making each other laugh with silly accents. Dude, I like that. So I discovered something about all of this. After I'd managed to get myself a kind of pat line about why I'd done this, and some things changed in my life, and I began to realise that I couldn't do Livity all my life, and there had been an inevitability at the beginning, and I'd never known about people. We got a business advisor about 3 years in, when there used to be a thing called Business Link, and the government sent advisors out to businesses. It was It's a good scheme. I believe it was Michael Heseltine's idea.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. And she came in and she sat us down. She was great, and she asked us what our exit strategy was. And we actually showed her the fire escape. She was like, no. No, you know, like the 5-year plan.
You can just imagine what's going through her head.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, oh, what have we got here?
Jesus Christ. And we're like, what, really? People start businesses to get out of them. Why would you do that? We've started a business to change the world, you know, like, surely. Doesn't everyone just do 12-hour days for not that much money and is really driven just to create change in the world? Like, what? You're going to sell this? It's crazy. And she's like, well, why are you doing it then? And still, I found it hard to put my finger on it. And there were some really big shifts in my life, and I ended up going to see a therapist, and I wasn't particularly keen on it, and thought, yeah. You know, sat down across the room from this psychologist, and she could tell, obviously, I looked a bit like I was slightly sceptical of the whole thing. And so she taught me a lesson, and she said, if you allow me to ask you 3 questions and you promise to answer honestly, I'll demonstrate what this is all about. So I said, okay. So she asked me 3 classic questions, like early memories, mum, and like dreams or something. And then she proceeded to tell me exactly who I was. And it was frightening. And she just described classic saviour complex, and which was like being reduced to a paragraph in a psychologist's, you know, textbook. That's it. All my complexity, all my, you know, hard work, decades of award-winning social enterprise. I'm just a paragraph.
Knight in shining armour.
Yeah, and just
I had to be careful. Somebody told me about a shite in whining armour before, so now I have to really...
Shite in whining armour. That describes my complex.
So I have to really think about what am I saying when I say that thing now.
Oh, fucking hell, this explains a lot, doesn't it? And I went back to see her, and she gave me one of the pieces of homework, which is why I was asking you that specific one. She said, when do you ever stop? You know, I said this is really interesting because I could never answer the question about, you know, when people say be yourself. Now I'm like, right, so I'll just go and have a saviour complex. I'm not
I'll
sure.
get a cape.
Exactly. I'm not. If this is really me, I'm not sure. And she said this. She said the same thing. When do you ever spend any time alone? Oh, I'm very busy helping people. She goes, come on. And so the exercise she set me was to spend an hour sat doing nothing. Alone, no devices, no distractions, no snoozing, no boozing, no nothing else. Just, you know,
I'd fall asleep.
An hour on your own, and you know, which I think these days would be called mindfulness or something. And it's an exercise that I've never stopped doing because, you know, and I then saw her for some years, and went on a journey to meet myself, and then along that journey, I found out why I did all of this stuff. Before my daughter was born, and I read a report from Guy's and St Thomas's that had done a study of about 7,000 fathers, so a considerable group, and 50% were encouraged before their child was born to go and have a conversation with themselves about their relationship with their father. And it was up to them to interpret that how they wanted. And the other 50% were the control group, and they didn't do anything. And they followed it for years. And the social groups, the academic success, the self-confidence of the children in the group whose fathers had just decided to consider their own role as parents. And again, it goes back to Frankl, you know, who are you, what does it mean? So I thought I'd do this. Now, my dad died when I was 5, and it was a shock to the system. He was 42, and I very quickly realised, and I was 5, and I realised that I was going to turn 42 the same year my daughter was going to turn 5. So I thought, this is something to reflect upon. Yes. And when I was little, I just assumed he'd died because he was old, because, you know, I was little. And now I realise that 42 doesn't feel particularly old. No. Quite a long way from it. And I don't feel at all ready to die. And again, like Frankl, I'm so glad you said that. It's my favourite book. And I have next to no memories, no real memories of my dad. But now I know how much he knew me, because I know, you know, my 5-year-old is, you know, thick as thieves. She's like my best friend. You know, I know her so well. And so this really made me think, about wasted time. And that sitting and getting to know yourself isn't wasted time, but there is a lot of time to waste. And I began to find out more and more stuff about him. When he died, the funeral had been really quick, and they'd been quite Victorian about it, and they hadn't taken my sister and I along. And then, I'd grown up and filled my life with stuff, from starting this place to, you know what it's like. Look at you, inventing the best podcast in the Northeast. And, we throw ourselves into things, don't we?
We need to win a reward for that sometime. We'll just make it we'll do our own podcasting awards. There we go. That's what they do, isn't it?
Excellent. The award-winning. And you just throw yourself. I ended up spending 8 years being executive producer of a TV show format that we just came up with as an idea, an interactive show that would get kids talking about the issues they don't talk about. It was such a good idea. We're like, we've got to make that happen. Just as the business social enterprise was taking off, and completely, nearly decimated Livity because we got completely distracted with being TV producers and had so much fun doing this thing that got lots of profile but didn't make any fucking money. And then we began a magazine for young people to put together, and again, massive distractions, and you just can't say no. But really, partly it was just filling my life with stuff to avoid some other stuff. And so I decided this was the time to look into it, and I started asking the people that had known him, and I found out a couple of really surprising things. He had been the first person in his family ever to go to university, working class background, and he'd done really well, studied law, and did okay financially, and decided that he didn't like it. He wanted to do something that meant something. And so he started working with young people and designed what was then South Bank Poly, a brand new way of teaching law. It was like he used interactive and immersive techniques. So one of the stories that his ex-students told me was one day a man ran in off the street and assaulted him, and then ran out of the tutor room. And there was, everyone's up in arms. And then 2 weeks later, a policeman comes in and asks everyone to give a witness statement. And then it turns out they're both actors that my dad had employed, and it was to talk about the validity of witness statements. Right? So this is the 70s. So here we both are, using interesting alternative techniques of working with young people in South London. With some of the students, he then comes up with an idea to create an agency that would give law and high-level legal advice back to communities, and an early nascent social enterprise. In a similar way that we've used the power of marketing to give back to communities. And he set it up on Brixton High Street, just down the road. And I found out where, I got the address, and it's almost directly opposite my first office, the one I was telling you about, that was the small room that we couldn't, that was too small to even put the pictures on the walls. I had no idea. I asked my mum, I was like, you've been to my office, you know exactly what it is we do. Didn't you think
it might be useful information?
Yeah. And then she said, oh, well, yeah, we used to go to the pub. So the pub that we all go to after the office is the pub that my mum and dad used to drink in, the Trinity, just there on Trinity Square. I had no idea. And then the firm did all right, but then he ended up being involved in this TV show called Wainwrights Law that had a dilemma ending on the back of it, right? Which is exactly the thing that we'd invented with this TV show that got us really distracted. This dilemma ending, like totally, and everybody, it was up for all these awards. It did really, really well. So everyone in my family knew about that, and again, no one mentioned it. The firm got bigger, they had more success, and so they moved up Brixton High Street, exactly the direction that we have. So this is our second office in Brixton, and his is now up, was just over there. No one mentioned it. And then very quickly, out of the blue, he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer and was gone in about 6 months. At 42. So I really I was like, right, fucking hell, how am I going to avoid the, if my life has directly mirrored him and everything that I thought I'd invented and done as new was actually like there, not just following in his footsteps, but literally following the same steps up Brixton High Street. How do I avoid the obvious next step, in his legacy and not die? What comes with this? And if I do, like Viktor Frankl's story, he probably spent half of his life worrying, procrastinating, wasting time, drinking too much and whatever. But the thing that I can now find out is the things that he did. The same as Frank, it's the actions that define us. And so I began to realise that not only do I have a saviour complex, partly informed by the death of my father and wanting to put things right, and then having grown up in South London, and I was in a really, really shit school, a failing school that was eventually closed, but with this middle class sensibility, albeit a single mum family. So I was kind of seeing both sides of the world. I had all the middle class trappings and support and outlook, but I was in a school with a lot of kids who didn't have that. So the unfairness, the inequality of it, and the unfairness that I'd suffered were what I was trying to put right. So kind of through the therapy, I'd seen that, and actually that had a direct impact on Livity, moving from an organisation which was there to help people, children, to realising that you can't really help anyone, but you can provide platforms for people to help themselves. And with that, the business had matured. I then discovered all of this stuff and realised that similar stuff must have happened to my father as his business had matured. So then I spoke to my mum and said, tell me something else, right? Give me something else that I can close the story with. And she said, well, there is one thing. There was a request in his will that we would set up a legacy trust at South Bank, which is now South Bank University, that whoever came last, because he'd written this law course, whoever came last every year would get a small bursary, because his belief was you have to work quite hard to come last. Like you're not just the natural talent or the clever clogs. And so she'd got in touch with South Bank and said, can we set this fund up? And they'd said, no, we can't encourage failure like that. And here was this recently bereaved woman with 2 children and a mother that she cared for. So she didn't really have the energy to pursue it. And so I thought, great, there's my chance. So I also got in touch with South Bank, and this is now a long time has passed, but they were still not so keen on the idea of it, and I didn't really have much traction. And I thought, fuck it, this must be a matter of open record. I can find out every year who came last, then I can track them down. And then I realised that was just going to be really weird.
It's fun though.
Yeah. And then something really strange happened. A young woman who had come here in her teenage years regularly, and she'd been so successful. She'd been involved in girl gangs, and she was sent here through the probation service, and here she'd utterly flourished. This really interesting, articulate, very angry woman, amazing debater. And she transformed her outlook and experience on the world. And when she left here as a young adult, she'd got into South Bank University to study law. And she made this wonderful speech that she wouldn't be back until she was the first black female Prime Minister of England. She went off and she began the law degree, and then she'd run into a lot of trouble. She met a fellow who was up to no good and ended up inside, but she had a child by him, and then the child was born with quite severe learning difficulties, and it was very, very hard life, and she had to drop out of South Bank. But some years later, she had managed to get back in, and she completed the law degree. And once she'd passed, she came in to tell us. And I was stood at the reception wondering what to do about this, and then this fabulous young woman walks in years since she'd left to tell us that she'd just managed to get her degree even if she'd come last. And there she was, right in front of me, this young woman, almost apologetic that she'd come last, but she wanted to tell us that that was it, she'd passed. And I could not believe it. And so sat her down and made her a cup of tea, and then told her this exact story, and asked her if it would be all right that I wrote her a cheque there and then on behalf of my father and his legacy. And she said yes.
I'll take your money.
And we stayed back in touch ever since. And that's that. And I feel and hope that that's the end of that. But by God, it really answered something for me about why you do what you do, and some decisions for me about what I was going to do next. And it wasn't quite the same clarity that you've got about waste, but I began to really question some of the things that I was doing, some of the relationships I had, the areas where I was perhaps treading water, the inevitability stuff that you were talking about. And I'm sure the metaphor of being more pirate, was largely to do with the rebellions that I needed to act in my own life. And I began the journey of transitioning out of Livity, whilst I love and adore it still. 15 years and some really big upheavals in my own personal life, because I think, my articulation of what you said is there is no greater tragedy in the world than a life half lived. And it wasn't that, I'd have a rich and wonderful life up until that point, but there was just so much more but having found out part of the reason, at least, why I do what I do, gave me a real platform to set out on adventures new.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So told you it was a surprise. I only found this out in the last few years. Completed the story by the time that my daughter was turned 5 last year.
No. Sorry, I'm just a bit blown away. Speechless, Michelle. It's very unusual.
You need to do the exercise of an hour on your own, not doing anything.
I think it would kill me.
Look at the fear on her face.
I know. I sit in the garden quite often on my own and just look at the flowers. Does that count?
Yeah, that counts.
Okay, do it. It's fine.
Okay, that's nice.
I go and talk to the plants like a weirdo.
That sounds lovely. Look, they're both speechless.
I know. It's amazing.
Is this a podcast first?
No.
Quite like it. Quite like a bit of silence.
Talk about Be More Pirate a little bit.
Yeah.
So where did Be More Pirate come from?
In 2016, Livity was turning 15, and I was doing a lot of thinking, as I've explained, and I was wondering about what to do next. And one of my mentors, I'm very lucky to have several mentors in life, but 2 who've been really consistent in my life. And one had seen me, and as he left, he turned around almost over his shoulder and he said, "You do know you're treading water at the moment, don't you?" And I thought, that's harsh. And I was doing a bit of research about Livity and thinking about what to do next, and I discovered a statistic that in 1965, the average life cycle of a business was 70 years, and in 2016, the average life cycle of a business was 15 years, and that was the year that we'd turned 15. So I was kind of like, right, I really need to think about not to be morbid about it, but like there's a shift happening in business, isn't there? It was the year of a certain referendum in the UK and a certain election in the USA, and so it felt like, stuff's really changing, and change is necessary, and how kind of polarized things were, that we either need something really, really simplified into binary that's too simple for the conversation that's required, or there's complexity that's so dense it's daunting. And there's no kind of, we're not very good at nuanced mainstream, difficult conversation. And I wanted to do something about all this. So it was time to hand over the business. I'd read the chapter on founder syndrome one too many times. And who's going to regenerate this at 15 years? The risk was that I would plateau it. And I wanted to be really honest. 15 years of running this super award-winning social enterprise, which I absolutely loved, and when we're doing great things, savior complex ticking away inside. Look out the window, pal. Fucking, the world has not changed, right? You haven't even helped all the young people in Brixton. Like, the world's a fucking disaster on your watch.
Oh, it's a bit a lot.
Yeah. No, I'm not taking. It's not my fault. It's your fault. Sorry, was that my brain? It's all your fault. And so it was that. What else can we do? And that's not a question just on me. It's a question on social enterprise and the social sector, and how easy it is to realise that you start painting yourself into the picture. And actually, if you're about real change, then redundancy should be the aim. If Livity exists to transform the fortunes of young people, if you're really going to do that to success, then you shouldn't be here in 30 years, because you'll have dealt with the problem. And it's very easy for organisations to slip into keeping themselves in existence being the goal. And then does that mean you're a participant in keeping the problem in existence? Possibly. To be harsh, but there's a question that needs to be asked in some of these circles, I think.
Yeah, I think I like what you said in the book about cancer growth.
Yes, yeah, I see that all the time. That notion of just growing for the sake of growing, is a form of cancer in medical terms, and so I had all these thoughts, and I decided that I needed a transitionary project to allow the team who take over, because I know my ego is going to make it hard for me to give them full control.
Let it go, let it go.
I know. That meme was sent to me.
I sing it daily.
Yeah. So I thought it felt like a kind of writing a book tickled my fancy, because it's that Eleanor Roosevelt line that I really live by. If you want to know what you should do next, you should understand what scares you most. Sitting on your own. I'm a bit dyslexic and a massive chip on my shoulder about not being academic and never having gone to university, and I wanted to prove something to myself. So my thought was that writing a book's probably a bit like an airbag, and it will fill all the space around you every second you give it. So that was it. And I decided to shout all of these thoughts into these empty pages. And the probably only reason that it's half good is because I didn't really think anyone was going to read it, and so it's really honest and filled with all of my observations and all of this stuff, and who knows? And it was a really boring book to begin with.
Was it?
Yeah, it was cool.
No dad jokes then.
No jokes at all.
Oh man!
No, it was really dull. It was called Purpose First.
Oh.
And yeah, exactly.
Keep scrolling on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Keep scrolling. And I got 20,000 words into a proposal, and it was the best articulation I could make for the case for a more enlightened approach to capitalism and the transformation of our businesses designed around purpose. I mean, it was like, exactly, yeah. It's like some shit TEDx
like
talk.
Yeah,
exactly. But I was trying to be a grown-up.
Oh, okay.
I thought, right, here I am, 40 years old. I'm leaving my agency. I now need to write a serious business book about everything that I've learned and go and do some grown-up stuff. And maybe I'll do some consulting and I'll write a boring book. And God, I was bored. I was getting bored even of the proposal. But I managed to get a book deal on that book. And then I was beginning to workshop it. My only approach to life or the generation of anything is to actively participate with your users, which isn't really how it's done in book world, but that's how I began to approach it. And literally people were like, fucking hell, mate, this is dull. And a really, really smart man who knew me really well and was a kind of big engine of the driver and success of Livity, a bloke called Callum, said, actually, where's all your usual metaphors? Where's all the space rockets? Where's all the pirates? And I wrote that down and sat on my desk for ages. And then I started to question, why do I always use the metaphor of pirates? And then I started to read into them a little bit. And I went and started doing some proper, more academic research at the British Library and then at the Greenwich Maritime Museum. And then the truth of pirates began to reveal itself. And then the book began to write itself because, the analogies that I've drawn aren't complex. They're really interesting. And it's a bit of history that's not only unknown, but is unbelievably prescient and particular to the times that we're in. And then my biggest fear became, once I got over the difficulty writing, once I found my tone of voice and it was me and I was making bad jokes and stuff.
Funny.
There's some funny jokes. Really funny. Then my biggest fear became, surely somebody else has drawn this before, right? And they just didn't market very well. But like, God, I'm rewriting a book. Someone must have seen this and must have written it. And so as it sped up, I was doing a day less at Livity every quarter that year to allow the new team to really take over. So I had gradually had more and more time on my hands. I also had less and less money in my bank. And so it was this like whooshing deadline coming towards me. And I was like, fuck, I've really got to make this thing work. But fuck, this is so obvious now. This is so obvious as I'm writing it. And I'm really enjoying it and I'm workshopping it. So I know the material's going down well, but someone must have written this book. And if they haven't, maybe they're writing it at the same time, because that happens a lot, right? Like there's zeitgeist, somebody else is on top of this. And so I began to really get quite paranoid about it. And then one day I found a book called The Pirate Inside, and it's written by this really senior and established marketeer. And I was like, oh shit. And I got it off Amazon, it arrived the next day, and I was like, fuck. And began reading the introduction, and he's there, and he's talking about Sam Bellamy, and he's talking about Anne Bonny, and he's talking about democracy and decision making. I was like, oh God. And it was a good book that had been well read in marketing circles, but it hadn't had kind of a mainstream success. And I was like, oh shit, this is going to really invalidate. But you got to the end of the introduction, and he says, but only an idiot would try and extend this metaphor over an entire book. And then the rest of the book is like classic, fucking diagrams and pyramids.
Shit, yeah.
But I am that idiot.
Well done. It's like challenge accepted. So you've spoken to this chap then?
No, I should send him a copy saying I am that idiot, shouldn't I? Yeah, I'll do that. That's a really good idea. I'll let you know what he says.
Like with a selfie. I'm with stupid.
It's me.
One of those t-shirts.
Yeah, and my book's more successful than yours. These mics are really good. They pick up your thoughts.
They do, aren't they? Kylie Minogue uses them. I don't know if she does. We made that shit up, you know.
Did you? Did you just make that one up?
No, it's apparently a standard stage mic, yeah.
Right. It's really good. I've sat here the whole time feeling like Kylie.
So lucky then.
Exactly.
Oh dear.
That was fun.
Okay, cool. I think we probably should let you get onto your meeting.
Thanks.
But it's been awesome to speak to you.
That's really, really great. It's lovely to see you again
Yes.
too.
And we'll edit that into something useful.
Great. I hope that's useful for the world. Basically, I mean, the best recommendation out of this whole conversation is everyone should go and read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, who articulates much better than we just did what it's all about. So if there's one piece of advice I can give, it's definitely that.
And have you got an affiliate link for that?
Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah, I think actually you can. I think you can buy it on bemorebiro.com. Excellent segue.
Brilliant, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you very much.
Oh dear, my cheeks are hurting.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.